I've been asked to say a prayer to open up this community meeting. My name is Pat McCabe, and I was also given the name Abeyta Settlement, Woman Stand Shining. It's a great honor to stand here in front of my community, my home, the place where I raised my children, and make a prayer on behalf of this meeting. Welcome to Kakashida, Mshimaka, Shamash, Che, holy people all around. To me, Yakba, Najinwi, coming before you on this holy day, Ampituki Day, Wopina, Hyehe. Thank you for my life. Thank you for all you've given to me and to my family and to all my relatives. Thank you for this sweet creation that you set us down upon. As I look to the directions, I'm thinking of all our neighbors to the east, Taos Canyon, and coming in through Canyon. To the west, the Mesa, coming in to Upper Las Colonias and Lower Las Colonias. I'm thinking about the north, from Cuesta, Taos Valley, Des Montes coming in. Thinking about the south, our neighbors Stakeout, Llano Quemado coming in to the center here. Holy Mother Earth, Holy Creator, holy people all around. This is our home. This is our family. I want to acknowledge all of our flying ones and swimming ones, creepy crawling ones, four-legged ones as well. I want to acknowledge these elder mountains that have held us and held all the people here since time began. I want to acknowledge our sacred gorge and the Rio Grande flowing through. I want to acknowledge our ancestors, everything they did, everything they held, the way they made their relationships such that we could all be sitting in this room together right now. Creator, Holy Spirit of this sacred water of life, you are the one that binds all living things together as family, and we acknowledge you at this time. You are the elder in this room, the elder of elders. You have seen it all. You were here at the beginning of creation, and every single one of our elders had a drink of you in order to have this life, in order to receive this sacred gift of life. So we acknowledge that long lineage. We acknowledge all the hardships. We acknowledge the struggles. We acknowledge the beauty and joyous times. And we acknowledge all the peacemaking that has taken place in this valley, such that we could come together and make community here, make lives here, experience the beauty of all that this land holds for us. Tonight we come together as there is a plan in the minds and hearts of the five-fingered ones here. And I'm asking for that spirit of peace and that spirit of high-mindedness, right mind, right heart, right body, right spirit, to move through each and every one of us. Help us to set aside whatever we think we already know, that we can hear each other, that we can hear our concerns, that we can hear our aspirations, that we can hear the dream that we have as community for this valley. So many peoples all over this world have lost their clean water, have lost their clean land, and are suffering. But Creator, up until this moment, you've given us beauty here. You've given us the possibility for health and pristine water coming off of our holy mountains. Pristine soil. You've given us an opportunity to have everything that we need to take care of everyone that we love. And so I ask that you fill our minds and hearts, bodies and spirits with whatever really needs to be known this evening as we come together. Show us that way. Show us that way to move in unison, to co-create something beautiful for life, for all of our life, to honor our ancestors and to honor the ancestors to come. We love this life. We love this place. We love this community. We love each other, ultimately. So help us to come together and put our minds together and do something good for all the future generations. Not just the future generations of the five-fingered ones, but also all of our relations. Again, the flying ones, swimming ones, creepy crawling ones, four-legged ones, because their lives depend on this also. We acknowledge all the ways in which the water has traveled across this land to feed the people, to take care of us. Show us the way to continue on with what our ancestors left us. The inheritance that our ancestors have left us here in a good way, in a responsible way, in a way that affirms life, light, and love. Aye, itakye, oyasin, wajana hasli, wajana hasli, wajana hasli, wajana hasli.
We are here tonight for the purpose of community education on the subject of the Abeyta Settlement and the future of the Taos Valley watershed. The Abeyta Settlement is a complex water-sharing agreement among the major water users in the Taos Valley, including the town of Taos, Taos Pueblo, El Prado Water and Sanitation District, the Taos Valley Acequia Association, the U.S. federal government, the state of New Mexico, and 12 Taos area mutual domestic water consumer associations. Here with us this evening is a panel of parties who signed the settlement and who agreed to be here to offer more information and to answer our questions. Of course, the goal and the hope is to have all parties present, but we are very grateful for those who are here. The Guardians of Taos Water are here, as well as other water scholars, activists, and experts who will speak throughout the evening. Our evening is going to be laid out something like this. We're going to start off with a quick presentation, talking about just an overview of the Abeyta Settlement itself. We are going to hear a presentation after that by author Kay Matthews. We will then hear presentations from all of the parties present about their position, role, and understanding regarding the settlement. We will then move into the first Q&A of the evening. This Q&A will be based on the questions that came from the community prior to this forum. After that, we will hear a presentation from Guardians of Taos Water that will discuss their current work regarding the settlement, as well as potential strategies, impacts, and alternatives. We will then conclude the evening with a second Q&A, which will be a public forum style Q&A, and everybody here will have an opportunity to ask questions of anyone on the panel or voice any comments. So now I will invite, I believe someone from Guardians of Taos Water will be offering us a brief overview of the Abeyta Settlement. Is that you, Azalea? Azalea Gusterson.
Thank you, Julia. Good evening, and thank you for coming. Let's see. Let's start before the Abeyta Settlement just a little bit. The way that water rights are handled in New Mexico came about when New Mexico became a state, and before that, water was considered a right of the commons and was really available to the people on the land who were there utilizing it and using it to live and for their lives. Let's see, the laws now are complex and they're interwoven. They have to encompass the rights of They have to encompass the rights of municipalities and districts and the acequias and several sovereign tribes within New Mexico. And so there's a lot to look at these days. It's not just who's there, has the water that's on the ground in front of them, unfortunately. On that note, the Abeyta Settlement has been decades in the making. About 70 years ago, when the first water claims that began this settlement implementation, or compilation, I should say, were filed. And the document itself has been just about 40 years now being constructed and put together by a skilled set of lawyers. The settlement negotiations began out of the necessity to settle the water claims that were first filed over 70 years ago. That started between mostly the town of Taos and the state, and El Prado Water and Sanitation came later in the mutual domestics. But these are all water users within our county, and to not lose their ability to use water, they had to file claims in court about the amount of water that they deserved the right to own and to use for the people that they represented. The settlement does indeed settle the, we'll call them disputed surface water claims, where the amount that each party had claimed kind of overlapped and there wasn't actually physically enough water for them all to get the amount they claimed. And the Abeyta definitely allowed them to kind of come to an agreement, specifically for Taos Pueblo, to say, well, we have the right through water rights in New Mexico are answered historically, and they've been here the longest, and so they could technically claim the full amount before anybody else was here in that use. And so through this agreement, they said, all right, well, we've never used that amount of water, and we never will, and so we're willing to let go some of that so that other people's claims can be legally realized. And so that's something that was a big part of it, where there was a lot of fear that the Pueblo wouldn't relinquish those rights, and they did. And in repayment, I should say, for that, they were given the right to use a lot more of the water rights than they were in the first place. And so they lessened the amount of water rights that they claim, but they expanded their use of the water rights that they retained. Let's see where I'm at here. The settlement then goes well beyond settling those water rights claims. It goes on to describe how all the parties will purchase new water rights funded through the state and the federal government, and then goes on to outline a new well field system that the parties will use to access the new water rights that they bought from different parts of northern New Mexico and the state that don't actually exist here. And then it goes even a step further to say that the amount of water that they're planning to draw out of these areas that are outlined in the Abeyta Settlement and whose water rights were purchased with funds through the Abeyta Settlement will deplete surface waters. And so they have put into the Abeyta Settlement a plan to drill a whole other set of wells, which are called the mitigation wells. And these will be the wells that actually do go into the deep aquifer, some of them below 25,000 feet, and that water will be pumped up and poured back into our tributary streams to make up for the amount of surface water depletions caused by their supply pumping. And surface water depletions just mean less water running naturally in our streams. So the Abeyta Settlement says that for every gallon less they calculate is flowing down our tributaries, our parties are responsible to pump and deliver downstream 1.33 gallons of water. And so we'll be delivering more than there ever was going downstream from our deep aquifers, which hydrologists have looked at and decided that it may take tens of thousands of years for the deep aquifer to recharge, and there are portions of it that may not be rechargeable. They're sealed until we drill a hole and start drawing out, and there's no way for this water to be replaced. This is all for future pumping and future diversions. And so this is not any water that is needed by any of the parties at this point. They all have the capacity with existing wells to serve our community as it is, and then some development, but not as much as they're hoping to provide for over the next 40 years. I want to hit a couple important points here. I'm kind of ad-libbing instead of going by my paper. So I'll just read the stated purpose within the Abeyta Settlement for why it exists, for what they actually wrote down for the purpose. And so it is, number one, to avoid court case, to avoid litigation, to avoid any of the parties suing each other or being sued, was their first reason. The second was to quantify with finality the amount of the Pueblo's water rights. That's what I was talking about. They agreed to lessen their claim in payment for being able to use more of that water that they retain the rights to. The third reason was to preserve non-Indian Acequia water rights. The fourth was to allow other non-Indian water rights owners to protect, maintain, and develop their water use. And the fifth reason was to restore, preserve, and protect the buffalo pasture. And they threw a sixth reason in there, which was to foster cooperation between the parties. I could describe briefly the parts of the Abeyta Settlement that go over those things. I'll make it really basic. As far as buffalo pasture protections, the Abeyta Settlement asks for specifically El Prado to cap one well, which has already happened, and that's the Overland Sheepskin Company well, which wasn't connected to their municipal system but was owned by them. And then it asks them to cap the future pumping amount on their two other wells that are within proximity to the buffalo pasture. It doesn't ask them to lessen the amount they're pumping now. It actually places that limit at about 3 times the amount they use from those wells right now. The second part of that was that any new wells by the town of Taos, El Prado, or other water users would be farther away from the buffalo pastures. And the third part was that some of the water that the Pueblo will now be using above what they did before will be used to revitalize the buffalo pasture and flood irrigate it to restore the natural wetlands there. We talked about this. The Abeyta Settlement is lengthy. It outlines all the different ways any of the parties can use water. We won't get into that right now. The town of Taos and El Prado, the sections about them both outline the new wells, the new water rights that they purchased, which were paid for through the Abeyta Settlement, so that they own the rights to more water that isn't available in this area yet, and then outlines the new wells that they'll be able to dig to access this water and the amounts that they'll be able to pull from this without placing a cap on future amounts that they can draw through buying more water rights. So technically these wells, more and more and more can be drawn as there's money to draw more, and that's developments coming in and wishing to, you know, buy water and build things for the most part. El Prado Water and Sanitation alone, they increased their water rights holdings to 5 times the amount of water that they use now. So that's the amount of growth that's this is making available just to smaller areas like this. All of the parties, the mutual domestics, all except just 2 of the Acequia associations would receive money. Most of the parties through this are receiving $2 to $3 million to purchase water rights and then to implement different parts of the plan. The town of Taos, El Prado would receive $15 million throughout the whole thing for their 2 new wells, the pipeline and all the infrastructure. The town of Taos was a little bit less than that. I have the numbers here, but several million dollars. The Pueblo received $88 million to complete their projects. I have some of their projects written as they were in the Abeyta Settlement, but we've been unable to receive any updates about where they're currently at with those projects, if they've been completed, what stages they're in, and we're still hoping to hear back from them and just get some open communication so we can know what's going on fully for the aquifer within our valley. So I described the mitigation wells a little bit. They're also called the Rio Grande Segment Depletion Protection. This is every gallon less that flows into the Rio Grande because of the over-pumping happening in our shallow aquifer. They're going to pump 1.33 gallons and send it downstream. It will cause surface depletions. That is the reason for including mitigation wells within the settlement. I wanted to, I don't know what my time's at here. How far am I? I'm 10 minutes in. Oh, all right, cool. So I'm just going to leave you with a direct quote from the settlement. It's really just something to think about because I do believe that a lot of the people that were fringe involved in putting this together really were trying to mend something that needed to be fixed in our community and really were trying to just settle claims and make sure that all the people that lived in this valley could continue to have water and live together. But also, as we learn more and more about the details of the Abeyta Settlement, really all of it might not have been such a grand idea, but this is what they're claiming about the entirety of the Abeyta Settlement, and it's 6.5.1.4 if you care to look it up in there. It's, the water rights parties agree that implementation of the projects identified in Articles 6 and 7, which are all the supply wells and all the mitigation wells, will promote public welfare and not be contrary to the conservation of water within the state. And so this is where I'm trying to give you kind of a neutral summary of the Abeyta Settlement, and I can give you all the facts, but it's going to be biased no matter what as I choose which facts are worth sharing, and I just really think that it's important to take another look at it and not take it at face value and understand that there might be parts of it that are positive, and we really do need to work together for the use of our water. But that doesn't mean that we need to include in it the whole second segment that has nothing to do with settling the water rights claims and has a lot more to do with providing up to 5 times the amount of water we now have available or more for future pumping and all that would entail. So thank you for listening to me.
Just so everybody knows, we are keeping as tight a schedule as we want to, as we can. We're trying to keep all presentations for tonight within 10 minutes. We will have, I think Angie will be our timekeeper, and answers to questions will be about 5 minutes. So presentations 10 minutes, answers to questions about 5. So we're going to try to stick to that tonight. I would now like to invite up Kay Matthews. Is Kay Matthews here?
Yes, I'm here.
Wonderful. Kay Matthews, would you, we were hoping you would come up and speak a little bit for us. For folks who are not familiar with Kay Matthews' work, Kay Matthews is a freelance journalist and editor of La Jicaria, which is an acclaimed online journal of environmental politics. She is an author and a scholar of many issues we are speaking about tonight. So please welcome Kay Matthews.
I want to thank the organizers for letting me go early on in the meeting because I got the irrigation water this evening and I'm not there. So I'm going to have to go home and see if my pastors in orchard are flooding because I did open the compartments before I left. So, I guess what I'd like to do is provide a little background from the perspective of those of us who have been involved in covering the Abeyta Settlement since the early 2000s when they started to come forward. They started working on the settlement and we started getting more information about what it entailed. And just a little bit more about me, I've covered it in La Jicarita and I've also covered the Hermitage equation. But I was also one of the protestants to the Town of the World transfer that was first sought back in 1998 by the County of Santa Fe. And that water from up by Ute Mountain, Sunshine Valley, has now been purchased by Santa Fe County and is being is part of the settlement of the Abeyta Settlement we're talking about.
Can you please speak up?
Oh, speak up?
Yeah.
Sorry. So my involvement in all of this also was as a party, one of the people who participated in the Taos Regional Water Plan, which came about in 2004. And one of the committees that was, the Taos Regional Water Plan was designated under the state water plan and for the 16 divisions in the state. And our division up here, we had committees and we were tasked with taking a look at water supply, taking a look at water need, and how we were going to make those two come together. And the committee that I served on was a public welfare committee. And I was listening to Azalea, and she did, at the very end, in her one of the statements that the Abeyta Settlement she was quoting from mentions the word public welfare. And this has been my focus all along on trying to figure out the best way for the parties in the settlement to be transparent, to understand what the public welfare means. And public welfare is one of the criteria that's used in the movement of water that comes under the auspices of the state engineer when a water transfer is filed with the Office of the State Engineer, and that agency has to decide whether it is in the interest of the public welfare, whether it's contrary to conservation, or whether it will impair somebody else's water right. So a lot of what I've been concerned from the get-go on the Abeyta and the Amit settlements on this movement of water out of its area of origin to meet the needs of these settlements. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of movement of water. The top of the world was the largest movement, 1,700 acre feet that's gone down to the Milwaukee Valley. And as Azalea acknowledged in her talk, there have been water purchases that have been made outside of the Taos Valley, which means it's outside of the district for which the Abeyta covers. And so that was one of our other concerns. Is water going to be moved from areas that are not part of the Abeyta settlement? I live in El Valle down by Peñasco. The people in Cuesta and the communities north of there are not part of the Abeyta settlement. So there has been movement of water from the northern part of Cuesta area, top of the world, other water rights from top of the world that have been moved down to the Abeyta settlement. As Azalea was talking about, these water purchases are necessary as part of the settlement. So what we did in the Taos Regional Water Plan Subcommittee on Public Welfare was an attempt to bring this movement of water to the attention of the Parciantes and the parties to the settlement who weren't in the back room negotiating the settlement. Unfortunately, over the years, there has been a lack, in my opinion, there's been a lack of transparency as the settlement was negotiated. And when we first started to find out exactly what the details were, there was a lot of surprise and a lot of concern. In the Public Welfare Committee, particularly, we wanted to be involved, at least be told where this water, any transfers of water was coming from, what it was going to be used for, and more of the details of what was going on, and that was not communicated to us. About 2006, when the settlement was coming close to fruition, we started to find out more about what it entailed in terms of the mitigation wells, the top of the world water transfers. And then in 2010 it was signed, and we started, the lawyers who were involved representing the various parties to the settlement were concerned that the Public Welfare Committee that we had set up to oversee the transfers of water and make a recommendation to the state engineer about whether that was in the best interest of the people of the valley and the Taos County, the people who were not included in the valley but who might be giving up water rights to see this settlement through. They became concerned and they started lobbying against the Public Welfare Subcommittee of the Taos Regional Water Plan. And this went on pretty heated debate, and finally, when we went before the Interstate Stream Commission, with our findings on the Taos Regional Water Plan, they refused to include a public welfare committee that would have that responsibility of overseeing water transfers and making recommendations based on our local needs and based on our ideas of keeping water in this area of origin. But then the county, which is not a party to the settlement, stood up and decided that they would form a regional water committee. And so they did. I was part of that committee. But instead of making a recommendation to the state engineer, we would oversee any transfers from Taos County or within Taos County and make a recommendation to the Taos County Commission as to whether that was in the interest of the public welfare of the citizens of Taos County. So I was on that committee for 3 years, and again, we faced a backlash from the parties and their attorneys to the Abeyta Settlement, again, because they felt that the decisions that had been made in the settlement were not in the purview of the committee that we had formed, and we, of course, disagreed with that. I remember many meetings with the Taos County Commission going through these arguments and insisting that we had no, this was a committee that just wanted to do oversight. We had no authority. The state engineer is the ultimate authority on whether a transfer will be approved, but we wanted to make public whether these transfers were where they were coming from, how much water was involved, whether they would impact, who they were going to impact, and whether they were necessary. So again, we faced a lot of backlash and from I'm not going to name almost all the parties. They were opposed to that kind of oversight. So that committee, I resigned in, I think it was 2013, because the county had changed, the membership of the county commission had changed, and the newest person who was elected to the county commission was not in favor of the Taos County protesting any transfers of water rights that were involved in the Abeyta Settlement. I personally protested a water transfer from the El Prado Water and Sanitation District's movement of water from top of the world. I also individually protested their the new 2 wells out on the Rio Grande and the movement of water between all those wells. Not because I was per se opposed to the development of these supply wells, because that was part of the settlement to protect the pueblo, but I felt like it needed to come into the public purview to find out, is this what we want? What is this based on? Are we looking, is this only because, is this to promulgate future development, or can we learn how to live within our means and the water supply that we currently have? Is that enough? Or are we going to have this movement of water and these mitigation wells that essentially underwrite growth and development? What is that growth and development? How much do we want? What water do we need to supply that growth and development? All these questions could have been answered under the public welfare criteria that we had worked out, and that the committee that was under the Taos County was pretty much settled. It still stands, but I don't think it's been reviewing any transfers. So that's about it. I just wanted to fill you in on how we kind of got to where we are now. We've been covering these issues since the early 2000s, and those were our attempts with the formation of the Public Welfare Committee to make sure it remained in the public eye, to make more transparency about what was going on, to question whether we need the wells in terms to underwrite future growth and development. So those are the issues that I'm trying to focus on and bring to the forefront.
We actually have a question for you, Ms. Matthews. We, Guardians of Taos Water, I think, collected questions from the community before this forum. And one of them was actually decided would be most appropriate to ask you, and I can bring this microphone over there. The question is, has the mitigation well offset plan ever been done before? And are there any case studies or impacts?
Not to my knowledge. I've covered the Amet adjudication, I've covered the adjudication in the Lower Rio Grande Valley, and I have not come across, I mean, I'm no expert in, outside of New Mexico, but as far as I know, within New Mexico, this mitigation well system is only been developed in the Abeyta Settlement. And that obviously, as Azalea addressed and I addressed, is kind of the critical component of this whole settlement, because the sole purpose of mitigation wells is based on future over-pumping by the town of Taos and El Prado Water and Sanitation District. And if the settlement had focused more on living within the water means of our area, then we wouldn't have had to take that step of these mitigation wells. And Phaedra Greenwood is here, and she's a Arroyo Hondo person, and that mutual domestic, which was assigned that mitigation well, does not want to manage the well. I know there's been other of the 5 stream systems each have to have the mitigation well. I know some of the other Acequias have questioned that as well. They're either supposed to be managed by the Acequia group in that stream system or the mutual domestic. And I know they've raised a lot of questions. And the whole idea of pumping, it's costing millions of dollars. It's pumping deep water that has to be treated up to groundwater that will eventually be put into the stream systems or the acequias. And people have a lot of legitimate questions about that. Did you have any?
I'm just
Do you want me
wondering.
to take questions now?
Actually, I think I would really, I think it might be best if people hold their questions to the very end. Oh, I see. That's true. I didn't realize that. Okay. Yes, if you're not going to be here at the end, then yes, let's take questions now.
I didn't bring my water.
Please. I can just run my microphone around.
I'm wondering about the cost of these wells. I think who has to pay for it? Who has to maintain the wells? Installation might be done by somebody else, but it's the cost of running them for each acequia. That's what my question is.
The federal government and the state have put together the funding to cover the development of the wells. Like I said, $1 or $2 million, I think, is mostly assigned to the and then the maintenance of the wells. So the cost is not to be imposed on the acequias. There's no way they could cover the costs that's going to happen. But they're not convinced by any means that that's not going to end up happening, that this is not sustainable, and that down the line we're going to be faced with problems with these wells, and some of these costs are fall on the backs of the domestics or the acequias. So people are nervous about that. But, it's millions of dollars. All of these settlements are costing the federal government millions of dollars. And right now, in the Amet, it's in danger of actually falling apart because the part of the Amet, there's a regional water supply that piping in water from the Rio Grande, our top of the world water rights that are coming out of the Rio Grande. And the federal government, the Bureau of Reclamation, which is in charge of overseeing the regional water plan, not the regional water plan, the water delivery system, it's costing way more than they thought, and the federal government is balking at the cost and threatening not to provide the money.
Thank you.
The AMIT is the adjudication in the Milwaukee Valley, and it's 4 pueblos. It's San Alfonso, Chisupe, Nambe, and Milwaukee, and all the non-Indian people in the valley. So, yes.
Yes, I just have a simple question for you. I'm a little confused. Are the mitigation wells the deep wells, are they the same thing, or is the mitigation well different from the deep well?
The Azalea made a little bit of a, she goofed. They're anywhere from 1,000, probably around 1,000 feet deep. That's what they were saying initially. But until they do the test wells, they won't really know. The 2 supply wells that El Prado is drilling, those were just to go down deep enough to get water supply. So I think the one that's still extant is 800 feet deep, I think. Is that what it is?
Okay, well, then just give me a definition of the supply well, the mitigation well, and the deep well. I understand what the deep well is, but the mitigation well and the supply well are a little confusing definition-wise. Can you just explain that real briefly?
I'm not sure what you're talking about, deep well. There's 2, the supply wells are that belong to the town and the El Prado Water and Sanitation District, regular supply wells to their systems. The mitigation wells are the wells that are assigned to 5 stream systems that will be pumped to compensate for over-pumping by the town and El Prado in the future.
Okay, are those the deep wells then, the mitigation wells?
Well, I think people refer to them as the deep wells, yes.
I think we're going to conclude this mini Q&A. We're going to
I
have
have a question. How many wells is there?
So we're actually going to have an extended Q&A a little bit later. We wanted to kind of take advantage of the fact that Kay Matthews is here at this moment, but there are more people here who know a lot of these answers as well, so not to worry. So at this time, I'd like to invite up our panelists, folks who are on the panel. Please, the stairs are actually right here.
Get up there, Chris.
All right. Yes. Microphones are there. They are. They just might not be turned up. So prior to this forum, an invitation was put out to all parties whose signatures were on the Abeyta Settlement to send a representative. The invitation was to come present on their position, role, and understanding of the settlement, as well as to answer community questions. We sincerely thank the parties who are present for making yourselves available for the forum and the conversation we're having this evening. And I guess I would like to just give a little point of information. The reason we have Azalea up here is because Mayor Dan Baroni actually wrote his responses to the questions in. He kind of wrote up his presentation in an email, and as well as his responses to the questions that we sent him. So Azalea will be sitting in for our mayor. And I would, so that's the introduction for this end of the table. And I would invite the two of you to, for folks who are not aware, would you mind just quickly introducing yourselves for us?
Hi, my name is Bob Callan. I'm the Vice President of the Upper Arroyo Hondo Mutual Domestic Water Consumers Association. And is that all you wanted for right now, or?
That's perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Chris Pieper from the
Acequia Madre del Rio Lucero y Arroyo Seco. We'll just refer to it as the Acequia in Arroyo Seco.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank all three of you. So the next segment is going to go like this. Each party will have 10 minutes, or if they want to take the whole time, it's 10 minutes, up to 10 minutes, to speak about their party's involvement and position on the Abeyta Settlement. Our timekeeper is Angie, right here. If it's necessary, and in order to keep the forum on schedule, our timekeeper will hold up a 1-minute card. It's yellow, so Angie, why don't you show them what that looks like? A 1-minute card. That means that you have 1 minute left. And I think we might also have a 30-second one, and a time's up card. So when you see that, it's pretty self-explanatory. Yes?
I was wondering why Taos Pueblo isn't represented?
Taos Pueblo was asked to be here. If there's somebody from Taos Pueblo who would like to represent, we would very much like that. No, invitations to all the parties were sent. We would really, really like it if somebody from Taos Pueblo felt comfortable representing, but
Well, I see Taos Pueblo as one of the main.
I completely agree with you, sir. Yeah.
For,
No, we were very much hoping that someone from Taos Pueblo was comfortable enough to
So I don't
take a
see
seat
how
at
we
the.
can go on without.
Yeah, absolutely.
So my name is Sage, and we personally invited Taos Pueblo representatives to come because we asked that no attorneys speak on behalf of the parties. We wanted people to be able to actually translate very simply the issues of this settlement. A lot of the parties refused to come because it's mainly been attorneys speaking on behalf of the parties. We are looking for a community forum in which common people can speak to common people. And so a lot of the parties, I'm just getting a message at 6:04 from the TVAA saying, since no attorneys were welcome to speak on behalf of the parties, they cannot come. So I just want to put that out there. We ask that no attorneys come, but we ask that they could consult with their attorneys before coming, which is why we provided questions beforehand, so that they could get legal consultation and then come. This is part of the problem. There has been a blackout on information. People do not want to share what is happening with this settlement. It is happening behind closed doors, and this is symptomatic of what happens when we're calling out for information, but nobody is here to share that information, and we are crying out to inform us as to what is going on. So I just want to clarify that at 6:04, we received a message from the TVAA attorney saying they would not be present.
Thank you. Right on, Sage.
So yeah, that's the reason for a lot of the open seats. And we have one more person joining the panel. Would you quickly just introduce yourself for us?
My name is Andrew Chavez. I am with the Llano Quemado Mutual Domestic Water Consumers Association. I've been with that organization for 40 years. If anybody that here lives in Llano Quemado and wants to volunteer to be on the board, we're looking for board members.
All right, so why don't we start from the far end, coming towards this way, with you, Chris.
So I'm going to share our story up in Arroyo Seco in hopes that it'll help illuminate the implications of this settlement and the importance of being educated in a democracy. acequias, as you all know, are water democracies. And democracies cannot be healthy unless the membership is educated. And so, about 5 years ago, it came to the attention of some of the members of our acequia that decisions were being made on our behalf. Decisions that we did not give our consent to. And so we began a process of educating ourselves. And it began with updating our bylaws, which was a very helpful process to go through. Essentially, the bylaws are the laws that we all agree govern the acequia. And I'm going to jump down here. Can we turn off the light? Well, anyhow, as my computer is thinking. So we got together, and about 12 members from the acequia got together as a bylaws committee. And our bylaws have not been updated since 1958. And we were told by somebody at the New Mexico Acequia Association that if we did not update our bylaws, we were in a very vulnerable position. And so soon after updating our bylaws, we began to investigate the impacts that the Abeyta Settlement would have specifically on our acequia. And what we soon I guess I'm just going to be talking. So, what we soon discovered was that our acequia had what's called an ASR well plan for our community. ASR means Aquifer Storage and Recovery Well. And basically, an aquifer storage and recovery well there are two wells. And the two wells that were planned for Arroyo Seco were both to be 1,000 feet deep. And one was an extraction well, and one was to be an injection well. And the injection well was to take surface water from the Rio Lucero and inject it at a rate of 330 gallons per minute deep into our aquifer, 1,000 feet down. Now, because that water was to be injected into the aquifer we use for our drinking water, it would have to be treated with chlorine, and it would also have to be chemically treated to adjust its pH. And this would require a metal building roughly 90 by 140 feet. And so during the wintertime, water would be injected, and then in theory, during the summertime, it would be withdrawn and added to our acequia. Now, these required extra water rights, and Kay Matthews mentioned that water rights were purchased from Cuesta. Well, the water rights that were purchased from Cuesta were purchased by our acequia. We didn't agree to that. We never voted on that. But we were told, and we were given the money by the Interstate Stream Commission, roughly $1.5 million to purchase extra water rights. The acequia up in Cuesta protested this transfer, but they were not successful. And so we have an additional 250 acre-feet of water rights. So the first thing we did was to look at what the impacts of this well would be to our community. And first of all, acequias, by definition, use only water that is diverted from stream systems. And so acequias cannot be acequias by definition if the water in the ditches is from deep wells. And then secondly, we looked at the cost, and we were told that, the federal government's going to pay for this well, and you don't have to worry about the maintenance costs. Tom Blankenhorn came to one of our acequia meetings as we were discussing this, and he said, "Why would you say no to free money?" And the man that Kay Matthews said she wouldn't mention, that's Tom Blankenhorn, by the way. So we looked at the settlement, we read it. It was our due diligence to read the settlement. And in the settlement it says, our acequia shall own and operate and be responsible for the maintenance costs. So the next thing we did is we contacted a number of engineering firms and eventually found the premier engineering firm in Florida that specializes in these ASR wells. And they gave us a generic estimate based on the well depth and gallons per minute and so forth. And their estimate was that this well would cost $114,000 a year to operate. And the lawyers at the Taos Valley Acequia Association said, don't worry. The federal government has set aside up to $121,000 for these maintenance costs. And we said, what does up to mean? Up to 121, well, what does up to mean? And they wouldn't answer that question. So we presented all this information to our membership, and the membership voted 60-0 not to apply for the funding for this well. We said no. And secondly, as part of this well, the Rio Lucero ditch, which diverts water from the Rio Lucero, this ditch was hand dug in 1850. It's a historic ditch. The federal government was going to replace this ditch with 2 plastic pipelines. I get emotional thinking of that. And at first, some of our membership thought, well, it's a good idea because we won't lose as much water to infiltration. We'll get more water. But then as we investigated it, we found out that as soon as you replace a historic acequia with a pipeline, you lose all the protection that comes with that acequia. We would lose all access. We would not be able to clean it anymore. And so the decision for us was abundantly clear. That if we were to give our consent to this deep well, that it would bankrupt our acequia. And that in order to pay that debt, we would have to sell water rights. It would be the only way. And so that's our story. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening.
Because I live there. It runs through my land. And I've seen it dry, and I've seen my field go dry. My horses, I can water them every day. And there's plenty of water. I'm wondering why we can't cultivate our land. And I have a tractor. I'm trying to help people grow their land and provide for themselves. But I'm hard to find because of the acequias. Water rights. Nobody
So actually what we're really trying to do is to hold the questions till the end.
So my question is.
Thank you. Okay. Let's move to the next presentation with Bob.
Hi, again, my name's Bob Callan. I'm from Arroyo Hondo. And Chris could have had more of my time if he wanted it, because I didn't come here to speak a whole lot. I came here to learn. Because as has been said here already, getting information about what's going on is very difficult. And our area doesn't have a whole lot of information, and we're basing our decisions off of a couple of things, some from our legal advisor and some from what we hear, what's going on in the community, much of what Chris went through. Our association too has 100% unanimously voted against doing anything with these wells. We don't want it in our neighborhood. In fact, I don't know that there are any neighbors who are willing to sell their land to make this happen. But we know very little about it, and I'm here to learn more, and I've already learned a whole lot more than I did when I got here. I have read the settlement to answer some of the questions that were on the list. But once again, the information is, you have to go out and get it, and a lot of us just don't have the time to do that while we're making our living, working, and doing what we gotta do. So basically, I'm here to learn from what's going on.
All right, next we'll be hearing from, the words of Mayor Dan Baroni from the town of Taos.
So within this email, Mayor Dan Baroni answered the questions that we forwarded to all the parties, but he also wrote an email to me precluding that, which I'm going to use as kind of the presentation from him, because it kind of just discusses his general position and understanding of this. So I'm just going to read this. And it was an email written to me. So I am in receipt of your invitation to attend your forum on May 1st. As you are aware by now, the Abeyta Settlement is a lengthy and extremely complex document that encompasses the legal results of years of litigation and ruling by the federal courts, centuries of water rights law, territorial and international treaty law covering the past 2 centuries, indigenous and land grant claims going back over 300 years, federal and state legislation, including acts and appropriations of the U.S. Congress and the New Mexico legislature, decades of hydrological and geological studies, and modeling by multiple government agencies, private contractors, and educational institutions, and involving multiple municipal governments, Acequias, Mutual Domestics, the Pueblo as a sovereign nation, the New Mexico Attorney General and Office of the State Engineer, the U.S. Justice Department, the Army Corps of Engineers, the Bureau of Reclamation, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and, going forward, the Bureau of Indian Health and Environmental Protection Agency. Well, I thank you for the invitation, and both I and the Town Council are enthusiastically supportive of providing as much information to the public as possible about this historic agreement and maintaining complete transparency about every facet of the settlement and the remedies it outlines. Having a single elected official be able to appear and accurately answer questions on every aspect of this decades-long process, including the history, technical and legal justifications for what it proposes, as well as the science behind the modeling, is simply not realistic. This multifaceted process is already approaching its 4th decade, meaning none of those holding office now were even in government when the process started, and some of our elected officials and staff were not even born yet. That None of us in office today actually signed or were a part of the approval process that took place before we arrived. The same also appears to be true for all of the other entities that you have invited and all of the agencies that are now involved in the settlement implementation. To understand or fully explain the settlement as in an informed, factual, and comprehensive way requires a panel of highly competent experts and professionals in multiple fields, not a single elected official. In speaking with our own consultants and staff, we were unable to identify any one person at the town, state, or federal level who has been involved in every field covered by the settlement. So, what would the best approach to educating the public and answering any concerns out there in the most honest and transparent way? Ideally, there should be an independent panel of third-party experts convened, or an independent entity containing the necessary expertise in all of the necessary fields that could provide an objective, factual, and thorough presentation of the history and technical ramifications of the Abeyta Settlement in order to initially educate and then be able to thoroughly answer questions from everyone. There is only one comprehensive and nationally approved regional water adjudication similar to the Abeyta Settlement, and that is the Abeyta Settlement, which was the companion resolution of the Aboriginal water rights to the Abeyta for those pueblos and jurisdictions south of us in the Rio Grande Valley watershed. We spoke to other communities involved in similar water-related issues and discovered that in the case of the Abeyta Water Settlement, they engaged an independent Water and Resources Policy Institute at the University of New Mexico to research the settlement, produce a comprehensive educational program for the public on what the settlement was about in plain language, its history, legal and scientific basis, and objectively analyzed its impacts. See how much further I have to go here. Okay, we're near the end. This was done through developing a website, making available various written materials they developed, and a series of large informational forums similar to what you are proposing, and small breakout meetings about more specific technical aspects that some individuals or groups were interested in. They found that a single meeting did not typically allow for a full airing of everyone's questions or concerns on such a complex issue. In general, participants in this process on all sides seemed very pleased with the process that was developed. Likewise, we believe that taking a similar approach here in the Taos Valley would be a good way to ensure maximum outreach to the public on this important issue, to be as transparent as possible, and to remove mistrust or the appearance of bias by any side in the decision. We are not yet certain where the full funding for this process will come from, as we estimate the cost based on the Abeyta experience to be around $40,000. But we do believe that timing and showing a public commitment to the process is important. So we have taken the first step as the town of Taos and asked our professionals to contact the institute in question to develop a plan, some tentative dates, and an estimate. The town has also approved $2,500 in order to get the process started as soon as possible. We will then be asking other parties to the settlement, and ideally those community groups that are concerned with the water issues, to help contribute to the cost. Let's see, we have recently used a similar, we won't talk about that, as a different subject. And so it's, let's see. So it says, in the interim, since we realize that developing and implementing a truly effective community-based educational process will take some time, I have tried to provide below at least some rudimentary answers to the questions you have forwarded to the town about the settlement. Again, since our current council is not directly a part of the process and we are far from being legal and scientific experts, these are the short answers to your questions as we understand them, but we will defer to the experts. On behalf of myself and the town council, Mayor Dan Baroni. Mayor Baroni.
mentioned, I am on the board of the Yanocamao Mutual Domestic Water Consumers Association. Our board was the only board crazy enough to volunteer to run one of the mitigation wells. I'll explain to you why we made that decision. But before I do that, I want you all to think about what happens to our water system here in Taos. And by system, I mean when it rains and it goes into the ground, and what happens to that water? Where is it going? You think about that for a little while. If nobody here lived here and it rained, where's that water going? Nobody's using it here. That water is always flowing south. Even the deep aquifers are flowing south. Okay? So most of the stuff that is being talked about is paper water. Because the water is going to go where the population is. Okay? Albuquerque and Santa Fe are going to take our water regardless of what the heck we say. Because that's where the population is. From my perspective, or from our board's perspective, we wanted to make sure that we were going to be able to meet the needs of our community. About 3 years ago, we got $2.5 million from USDA. $1.5 million was the loan, and the other million was a grant. We went out and we had to get this money because we have a fluoride problem. Anybody that lives close to the hot springs in Llano Quemado has fluoride. The further away from the hot springs you get, the less chance that you'll get fluoride. Well, we consulted with Paul Bowers. Some of you may know who he is. While I was in the commission, we contracted with him, the commission did, to do a study of the Talpa-Yanocamao Rancho area close to the mountains to see what the geology and the hydrology was about there. Well, we consulted with him as to where to drill this well. We went 1,200 feet deep, 1,000 feet, no water. Right there in Llano Quemado. 1,000 feet we hit water, and we went another 200 feet. That water had as much fluoride as the one that we currently have, so the well was useless. The board, of course, of the Llano Quemado Mutual Domestic, we all felt like, what a bunch of dummies. We threw $300,000 down that hole. Right? But in the meantime, we're needing to meet the needs of the community. We're under an administrative order to do away with our maximum contaminant limit for fluoride. Eventually, we drilled another well in a different place, and we got water that was low in fluoride. So when this opportunity came, I'll tell you, the model that is being discussed about there, what kind of gets me about everybody that's here is we're all talking without not knowing a damn thing about what we're talking about. We're getting everybody all excited about stuff, and we don't even know what's going on. This young lady said that those mitigation wells are supposed to suck up water and send it downstream. That is not what the Abeyta Settlement is about. What the Abeyta Settlement is about is if the town, because the town and the Pueblo are the ones that have the most water rights under the Abeyta Settlement, if they build so many houses around so much development that they dry up the shallow aquifers, the ones that flow into the streams that we are using now to irrigate our land, And I don't really know whether this model is going to work or not, right? I have the same questions that you have. So the idea is you drill this mitigation well, you suck up the water, you put it up before the acequias start cutting away from the river. You put it up there and you make the acequia system whole. In other words, they'll have water to continue to irrigate their land. That's the idea, right? Whether it's going to work or not, who knows? I mean, who knows? I have my doubt. The other idea is that they're going to go, the idea is this mitigation wells is going to access water that is flowing directly into the Rio Grande now, and we're not here in Taos using it. Who is? Santa Fe, Albuquerque, somebody else. Because that water is continually flowing south. It's not staying here. Okay? So, but if you really want to stop this water from flowing anywhere away from Taos, then develop all of Taos. Put all the houses here in Taos and drill all the wells that you can here. That way you suck up that water before it flows south. That's right? Why? But that's not what we want, right? But I know this isn't what we're here to discuss, but that is actually what's happening here in Taos with the town and the county wanting to promote development, right? That's what's happening because the state allows a well to be drilled for every 6 houses, 3 acre feet. They don't have to buy water from anybody, water rights from anybody. If Llano Quemado Mutual Domestic doesn't have enough water rights, and we want to provide water for 6 houses over there, we have to ask somebody to sell us their water rights and dry up their land that is being irrigated. If you really want to go after something, go after the subdivision laws that allow subdividers to drill wells and not have to have water rights. Because they get the water right, whether you like it or not. But going back to Llano Quemado, we have in Llano Quemado we have and so the idea is that we're looking forward to the future as to when more people live in our area, our kids grow up, or more houses are built, so that we can have water to provide to that future growth in our community. As our people have divided their land into more and more houses, we want to have the ability to provide that water. And so we volunteered to run one of those mitigation wells because it's a well. And primarily, I wasn't like, I used to go over to think about it, but I used to think, John Painter, he's a nut. Until I went over there to his organization. They have a well that pumps out 1,000 gallons per minute and happened to have saved thousands, but this last summer with that water. We want to have enough water to provide water to the people of Llano Quemado. That's what my and our board's primary objective is. But anyway, thank you. Thank you.
I think I can ask questions now.
Not until Q&A. All right, so thank you to our panelists for the presentations. We are now moving into the first Q&A segment of the evening. Remember, the second Q&A, the one where the floor is open to everybody, will happen in just a little while. But this Q&A is kind of special because prior to this forum, all prospective panelists were given a list of questions that were collected from this community. And I will be asking some of these questions to the panel now. We narrowed it down to about 5 or 6. And with the help of our timekeeper, we ask that any individual's answer to a question be kept to approximately 5 minutes or less. And we'll have we'll use the same cards. So the first question, and we have 2 microphones on the table, and I think you guys can kind of just jump in as you feel. We'll just kind of go down the line here. The first question is for anybody. What is your vision for the Taos Valley watershed for the next 20, 50, 100, 150 years? Ms. Pieper.
Taos is blessed with a really unique hydrologic system. Sorry to use that word. But the acequias recharge our aquifer. And a study was done by Tony Benson 10 to 15 years ago during some years of drought. And they found that despite years of historic drought, most of the areas in Taos did not see a drop in their aquifers. So when we're told that all the domestic wells are the problem, that's not the problem. We have a beautiful system. And if we take care of it, like Pat said, we have all the water we need. And there are scientific studies coming out now about watershed restoration. And by restoring our watersheds, and that means by thinning the forest, and that's not intensive logging, it just means that these second and third growth forests that are too tightly spaced, a lot of the snowfall never reaches the forest floor, and it ends up evaporating from the trees. A process called sublimation. About 50% of the snow that's in the canopy sublimates and evaporates and drifts off to Texas. By thinning the trees, they've demonstrated that watersheds can produce anywhere from 10 to 20% more water. And that's just by reducing the evaporation. And then if you look at our soils, through soil restoration, we can increase the water holding capacity of our soils by 4 times. And this is achievable. People are doing it all over the world. In places like Australia that have climates that are far more severe than ours, drier than ours. They are improving their soil, and those soils are retaining far more moisture. The 2 things that New Mexico has is high evaporation rates, and we have a lot of runoff. And we have to reduce both of those, capture more of our water. So I think this has to be a community effort. We all have to do this together, and I think it should not be from the top down. This should involve the entire community. Everybody has a part to it. And so I think all democracies should question authority.
Same question. You can repeat it if you'd like.
I'll pass.
Okay. Shall we? Azalea, did the mayor respond to that?
He did. So what is your vision for the Taos Valley watershed for the next 20, 50, 100, 200 years? The town's vision for the future is an open book and has been embodied in numerous planning documents and studies developed by the town, the county, New Mexico Tech, private consultants, and our water partners and the community, including many conservation and nonprofit groups, as part of our annual water assessment and planning process. Not the least of these is the Taos Regional Water Plan, which the town, county, Office of the State Engineer, and the Interstate Stream Commission co-chair. Obviously, watershed protection goes hand in hand with aquifer protection, as does water monitoring, planning, and conservation.
The town and county, as well as all water providers, consumers, and stakeholders in the Taos Valley watershed, including the Acequias and the Taos Soil and Conservation District, have been actively involved in community-based planning processes and increased watershed protection, watershed planning, and developing monitoring and conservation strategies. In addition to monitoring and conservation, the town is very actively involved in a number of programs, along with its federal, local, and nonprofit partners, in a wide variety of measures to preserve and expand our actual water capacity and quality through restoration of wetlands and our rivers, the Rio Fernando Collaborative and Restoration Project, wetland protection through land use restrictions, and the protection and purchase of open space. Acequia preservation and revitalization as a mechanism for increasing groundwater recharge, an extensive collaborative of forest thinning, which increases the amount of moisture that does not evaporate and instead returns to streams and wetlands, eradication of invasive species such as weeds, salt cedar, Chinese elms, and Russian olive that destroy natural habitat and ground cover, clog waterways, and remove water from the indigenous ecosystem. Preservation and restoration of the tree canopy and former pasture land which cools the valley and helps retain moisture in the ecosystem by reducing runoff and filtering and cleaning water before it returns to the water table. We have also worked with New Mexico DOT to work on implementing an increasing number of bioswales, which will be integrated into the entire length of Paseo del Pueblo through the town as a part of the current renovation project, which will naturally filter contaminated runoff from roads, parking lots, and rooftops, and return the cleaned water to the Rio Fernando and other streams and rivers in the watershed. We have adopted similar requirements for private development to capture, filter, and return runoff from hardscapes back into the ground to recharge our water table. And of course, I have already explained our belief that the most common sense solution to water conservation is regionalization. In some water systems, almost a third of potable water is lost through leaks into sewers or in other ways that it is lost or unusable because small aging systems can't keep up with the required maintenance of those operations. Replacing countless wells that are not being monitored to make sure that they are using what they are permitted, and replacing aging and leaking septic systems that are permanently contaminating our surface and groundwater by installing municipal regional systems is the most impactful, cost-effective, and last solution to conserve water quality and quantity. If you want to encourage conservation of anything, water, electricity, gasoline, you can design a progressive pricing structure that rewards those that find ways to conserve and place a disincentive on those that waste.
Disincentive.
A disincentive. The opposite of an incentive. Thank you.
Andrew, do you have a response to that?
Well, beware of anybody that speaks with a lot of authority. Don't take anybody's whatever they say. I mean, I tell you that it's very simple. We're going to want to save the Acequia system so that it can continue to replenish our aquifers. Plant the damn field. How many programs have been put in place by our school system, by our ag extension agent, by our county, by our town, to help people find a crop that they can make some money with so that they can have an incentive, not a disincentive, an incentive to use that water on their fields so that they can sell whatever product they get, marijuana, something. Right? I tell you that just cleaning the acequias and making sure that the water flows through them serves no purpose. It serves no purpose. Because if you don't use it to irrigate your land that you're planting, there's a law that says that the state engineer can come and take your water rights anyway, because you didn't plant your land. So all this stuff is just mumbo jumbo. It really is. I mean, we're just talking to keep everybody happy as we move along and continue on our merry way.
And our next question, I think, would be most appropriate for Andrew and Bob. The question from the community was, who will be responsible for the financial burden of maintaining any required water treatment plants for mitigation wells? And is your party prepared and able to shoulder the implied future costs, which are not covered by initial Abeyta funding?
I guess I can't ask a question.
It is my understanding from our legal representation that if we, as the domestic association, do not take ownership of this, that the town will take ownership of it and do the drilling and do the maintenance of the whole thing. And the cost of maintaining it is one of the reasons that we chose not to implement it. And there you go, there's my answer.
Thank you, Bob.
My understanding from talking to the town attorney and the Taos Valley Executive is that the mutual domestics, the town of Taos, and Prado Water and Sanitation, they are going to be the ones that are responsible for the payment of the operation and maintenance of this well. There is no money for future operation and maintenance. The other thing that I will say is that currently there is already not enough money to bring these mitigation wells up. I mean, to drill them and put them to practice. There isn't enough money. We've already taken too long to put this in for the money that's available to do the work.
Thank you, Andrew. All right, this one is for the mayor or the town of Taos. We will all be impacted by the implementation of the settlement. Do you know of any plan or plans in place to compensate members of the local community should damages to private wells occur due to drawdown and cones of depression caused by new wells?
No. Negative impacts to private wells are not anticipated from the mitigation wells specifically or the settlement generally. The mitigation wells will draw from much deeper zones of the aquifer below the level where most domestic wells draw water from, which is the area recharged by surface water. Also, be aware that well owners who had concerns about negative impacts have already presented their concerns and any objections to the federal court. The court found that the objections and concerns raised were unfounded by the physical evidence and dismissed them as not being substantiated. It is also important to note that at the state level, as a matter of historic New Mexico water law, down draws in wells are not considered to be an impairment for the obvious reason that wells experiencing interference may simply be deepened to reach the same or a different water table as the levels fall, which can also happen seasonally and in prolonged climatic cycles in New Mexico.
Chris.
Anybody here live in Talpa? A couple of years ago, the Talpa community mined the ditch that brought water from the reservoir. Within less than a year, 5 domestic wells went dry. And so I think one of the impacts that these mitigation wells will have that really is not discussed is it really alters the recharge that the acequias provide for our aquifer. If you're replacing acequia water with well water and putting that well water into the acequias, that equation just does not work. You cannot recharge the aquifer with deep well water. It just does not work. So these mitigation wells will absolutely impact domestic wells.
Thank you. All right, and our final question for this segment, for this Q&A of questions that we collected ahead of time, is for everybody and anybody who would like to answer this question on our panel tonight. Do you believe it is possible that the privatization of water in the valley could result from this settlement? Mayor Dan Barone.
No. This is Mayor Dan Barone's answers. Please don't. Maybe the views and ideas I represent I may not agree. No, the settlement does not contemplate privatization as part of the implementation process. It does not regulate or prohibit private homeowners, private well owners, farmers, or anyone who is not a party to the Abeyta Settlement in any way from drilling a well, using an existing well or acequia, from irrigating, or in any way doing what they are already doing, or doing what is already permitted from being done in the future. If you can drill a well or are on an acequia, you will still be able to get your water whenever and however you want. There is no regulation of anyone under the settlement, only an agreement between the parties to the settlement as to how much each is entitled to as a portion of only the rights that are the subject of the settlement, and where they can get it from. No one is claiming possession of all the water. If anything, this settlement works the other way to ensure universal access by providing an alternative to the Pueblo's original claim to ownership of all the water in the valley. Since water is, therefore, still a free and unregulated resource available to anyone who either has water rights or drills a well, how would it be privatized?
I have another. Throughout the country, many mutual domestics are being privatized. I think we all know that. Certainly is not unprecedented. And typically the reason why a mutual domestic will be privatized is because they can't afford their debt. And oftentimes states will force mutual domestics to upgrade their equipment or to make changes that they cannot afford. And so they are forced to sell. And it's happening all over the world. And I think we would be terribly naive if we believed that the Abeyta Settlement would protect our mutual domestics from being privatized.
Anyone else want to respond to that inquiry? Andrew?
The perspective of Llano Quemado mutual domestic that we do not see in the foreseeable future this Abeyta Settlement leading our mutual domestic to be privatized. In fact, we're working in the opposite direction, and that is to work with other mutual domestics to regionalize and to be under one umbrella. It's hard to get people to work together, but that's what our effort is.
Okay, thank you. All right, so that's it for the questions that we're going to ask in this segment here. Thank you once again to our panelists. We're hoping that you'll actually stay where you are because we know a lot of folks in this audience have questions as well. Before we hear those questions though, we're going to hear a very quick presentation from Guardians of Taos Water.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Buck Johnston. I'm still working on my public speaking, but I'm going to do the best I can here. I'm Daye, Kachi, the Anastasia, Bataan Hall, my clans. But I'm from Taos. I've lived here my entire life. My dad built a house right by the Yano hot springs when I was born. And I've considered myself a protector of that land and that water. Sorry we haven't met sooner, Andrew. And I'd like to say a special thank you for coming and speaking and offering your perspective. It's really important for us to hear what's going on from people that are involved. So, yeah, thank you. Respect. I'm a member of Guardians of Taos Water. I consider many people in this community guardians of the water here, and Andrew said that this what we're doing now is just all talk, and some of it's mumbo jumbo, and I'd like to disagree respectfully there, because we're at a turning point here in the Taos community. With the installation of these new wells that are going in, is going to allow for unprecedented extraction of our aquifer water. Here in the Taos Valley, we have many springs. We have warm springs and cold springs, and it's a place unlike anywhere else. And once we start extracting these mass quantities and volumes from the aquifers, it's eventually going to affect our springs and the springs that pour out into the Rio Grande and the wetlands, the water table that comes above ground and back into the ground. Eventually, it's going to be affected. It might not be in my lifetime, my daughter's lifetime, but say 500 years from now, that natural underground water system will be affected in one way or another. And so right now is our last chance to draw attention to this issue and get everyone informed and make sure that we're all operating with the same pieces, or operating knowing all the pieces. It seems to me that all the parties in the settlement, no one has all the pieces. They have their own part and they're sure about that, but no one has the cumulative effects down, and they really don't know the entirety of the situation or the effects. As Andrew also said, we won't know what happens until we drill a well and we test the water. We see if there's fluoride in the water, if we're going to need a treatment facility. And same with John Painter. He says, well, we're not going to know if we're going to dry up the neighbors' wells until we run this well for a while. And if we do dry up their well, it's okay, we'll provide them water. We're going to charge them for the water, we'll go run a line to their house for a fee. And so this is part of why me and our group has decided to make some public actions, one being the drill rig sit, is because I thought it was very important at this point in time to bring all the issues that have to do with the settlement to the attention of the public. I'm not saying I have all the answers. I'm here as humbly as can be. I'm no expert. I'm no hydrologist, but I do work very closely with the water. I use the ditch water coming off the hot springs, the Ponce de Leon hot springs. I irrigate my corn and beans with that water. In town, I use the ditch, the Jose Benito Martinez ditch that comes off the Rio Fernando. And right there, I'm actually plowing up a field. We're going to grow hemp this year. I've already planted the seeds, got them started. We have 10,000 hemp plants, and we're going to create CBD oil, which is medicine for cancer patients and people with other ailments and pains. I work on the Pacheco ditch, which comes off the Rio Pueblo, and we irrigate 10 acres of hay fields over there. I work very closely with this water. I dig holes for the fence posts, and I see the water table. I see it go up and down, and I feel good about myself because I help replenish their aquifer regularly. I spill water with all of these ditches. And I hope to see more people in the community doing that. But I'd just like to thank everyone for being here this evening to help educate themselves and listening, and everyone being respectful. I really appreciate that too. So with that, I'll pass the mic, and thank you panelists for being here too. Really appreciate it.
up. And David has served our community as a county commissioner, and his involvement in the protection of the water goes back, well, before the Abeyta Settlement began in 1969. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Cliff. Thank you, everybody. I'll start off by expressing my profound admiration and respect for some of this group who have taken extraordinary steps on behalf of the water issue here, including Buck and Pat McCabe and everybody who's been brave out here in standing up, raising these very crucial questions that most decidedly need to be answered. I'm David Fernandez of Taos, a native of Taos, part Spanish, part Navajo, and such. But primarily I've been involved and interested with water for a very long time. Going back to, I guess my more active involvement began in the 1970s with a famous Indian camp dam incidents that took place back then. I don't know who in here might remember any of that. Back then, after 1969, when the adjudication of the water question started to come up, and the San Juan Chama Project water experiments were being floated around here, there was the idea of turning part of the area west of Ranchos towards about Talpa into a water conservancy district, whereby waters from the stream systems would be pulled into a lake and kind of consolidated there, and making water available to everybody, including the town of Taos and so forth. But the price of that would have been that the acequia systems in the area would have lost their autonomy and they would have lost their traditional character. And that's when people like Andres Martinez and others formed the Tres Rios Association, Rio Grande do Rancho, Rio Fernando de Taos, and Talpa as well, Rio Chiquito, and went through much of the same thing. U.S. Federal District Court. Finally, that idea was defeated. Andres Martinez had been the chairperson of that, and we stuck with it. After a while, I became the chairperson of Tres Rios Association. And since then, my own interest, along with others, some who have passed away, bless their memories, we stuck with it. I know that I've been following this very, very closely. We know that right now with the Abeyta Settlement, which is kind of sprung out of some of those early events and incidents, the Taos Valley of Water, things have moved on quite a bit. The acequias, by and large, continue to perform their role as diverting water from the rivers onto the lands and in the way that they should have been, that they've been doing for such a long, long time. The Abeyta Settlement by now has its pluses, I believe, in terms of an overall vision of allocating and identifying, quantifying water rights for everybody who has an interest in it. At the same time, bit by bit, it is threatening to wring the water off the land, bottom line. other things that have not been talked about tonight, economic pressures, agendas of big developers far behind the scenes and maybe thousands of miles away are having an effect on what's going on here too. You know, if you stand back far enough, way far back enough, you can sort of get an idea of what's going on here. Some of what's readily apparent is the gradual disappearance of arable lands and increasing economic pressure on long-time local traditional peoples here, Spanish people, for example, and others. As bit by bit, they're not able to keep up with the tax on the lands, changes in the agricultural tax exemptions on lands, for example. I know my own lands came into that for a little bit, but I was able to reverse that. But bit by bit, there's just this implacable pressure building, settling down like I don't know, like what? Pressing down on the communities here, on the traditions, on the cultures, on the ways of life here, and also threatening, quite literally, to disconnect the soul and the heart of the people here from the lands and from the waters and the way it is. An example that was just given a few minutes ago was, well, the acequia up in Unseco, fine acequia built in the 1850s, but suddenly to make it work and to make the Abeyta plan work, the idea comes along that now it needs to be pipelined, and big physical change. And you see that almost everywhere else. The Indian Camp Dam idea would have also done that. Change the character. Thank you. This is happening more and more all over the place. So yes, we're talking about what some have called a done deal by now, with millions of dollars committed already, and a lot of digging and drilling already taking place, just to try and make the Abeyta Settlement work. Some very far-fetched hydrological and geological ideas and proposals have been put forth just to try and make this work somehow on paper. But it brings me back to what really matters here, in my own opinion. What Pat McCabe has brought up, and Buck and others, what has drawn so many people here to our area, the beauty of the area, the meaning of it, the colors of the spring, the strength of the traditions and the cultures, the living ties that we have as human beings with our lands and our cultures and our traditions. I don't know if these kind of things are worth $1 million or $2 million or however millions of dollars. Somebody can figure that out on paper, I suppose. Myself, I just don't see any comparison at all. I think that there are benefits to parts of the vision of the Abeyta Settlement in terms of water sharing and up to a point. But the great peril that we face here is, quite frankly, the loss of soul, the loss of heart connectivity to the lands and in our area here. We have many, many traditions that are beautiful and wonderful. For example, even the upcoming date of May the 15th, which is going to be San Isidro Day, and some plans are being made to carry on that tradition with blessing. So we're talking about another dimension here, above money and pipelines and drilling and so forth. Has to do with the idea of living in harmony with our culture and our land, and blessing, living together in peace with the land and with each other. These kind of things need to be squared away with the Abeyta Settlement. And I know that for my part, having been involved for many years in many ways, through writing and through different kind of activity, even as a county commissioner, and my radio programs and so forth, I intend to support the work of all of you here who care about the more intangible and more priceless aspects of our lives here, the heart and the soul of our community. And I commend everybody here, and I support everybody here who has an inkling towards that way as well. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fernandez. So I introduced myself earlier. My name is Pat McCabe, and I always say that even though I got here when I was 20 years old, I grew up here. This place has raised me up into who I am today, and so much of that actually has to do with the water. The springs, moving the water with a shovel, with my children, with my community. So this time is really close to my heart. So this idea of poking all these deep holes in the ground all throughout our valley to extract water seems extraordinarily risky to me. I think if we look very, very closely at all, we'll see many instances in which science was certain that they knew what would happen with the earth. And then it turned out she had her own way of being that they could never have anticipated. And I think this has happened over and over again all over the world. And so for me, what I'm hearing, apart from who gets what and etc., is I keep looking at that idea of poking these holes through rock strata and not really knowing what's going to happen until it's too late. Personally, that's an unbearable thought for me. And yet, I want to say that in a way, I think this Abeyta Settlement, and I think our young people, what has been said in some of the early discussions was, people coming forward and saying, well, I wouldn't know anything. I've only been working on this since 1969, and here come all these young people this last year, and they got all this to say about it. And what I want to say is I think that they have a view that all the people who've been embroiled in this discussion for decades could never have. When you're in that many years and that many generations of trying to work out an agreement, I think we don't really get to see how far away from center we get let out by making one compromise after the next, until we end up with a plan that is so convoluted And I really think that in a way, the way that it is convoluted and the way everybody is saying, well, we can't really understand it, yet it's our lives. It's our lives and our future that will live the consequences of what everything that's in that legal agreement that's that thick. So we have to do our best to understand what is being said there. I know that many of the young people on GoT Water have been reading and reading and reading. They're up day and night thinking about this and trying to get a handle and understanding it. And I'm going to say that I think some of them probably have as much grasp of the situation as anybody else in this valley. So I think in a way it's a blessing that this has come about. I'm not sure when we've had a forum like this in our town on any subject on water quite like this. And what I want to say is, I don't know how it happened. I worked at Copy Queen for 8 years. I worked with Amigos Bravos for some years. I'm a home girl, but all of a sudden I started getting called to go work all over the world. And so I just want to bring back a little bit of that global perspective to us here in this valley. And that is to say that people all over the world are having to ask what this forum is asking, what our valley is asking, which is if things, actually at this point they're saying, when things break down, as we can see all around us, that's happening. How will we have our water? How will we have clean food? What kind of position are we in to take care of ourselves? And so I think what the blessing of this is for us to have that opportunity to do that together. And I want to say that this is not an isolated incident for the Taos Valley. It wasn't an isolated incident for Powake. I mean, even though in 1969 maybe people weren't seeing the threat to life that we're seeing all over the planet. But here we are today and we're seeing it. So when people say that this settlement is a done deal, I want to say those holes have not been drilled yet. So in the ultimate reality of it, it's not a done deal. And so this is an opportunity for us, and I know we have this big legal agreement club standing over us, but if we think about it, people all over the planet are in that position, and they are coming to be able to rearrange done deals, to acknowledge what it's going to take to have our life. We're seeing it in particular in the fracking industry. Legal agreements or legal settlements or legal rulings are being made in consideration of what does this do to the future of the land? What does this do to the future of life? And so things are that's starting to be included in legal agreements, in legal rulings. I'm wearing a lot of stuff here, and I want to say why. I'm wearing this earring because it was gifted to me by our relatives in Brazil, who have just had tens of thousands of indigenous peoples camped out on their Congress lawn to say that they will not stand for the rainforest to be destroyed, for everything to be taken from them. I'm wearing this scarf because it belonged to a Buddhist nun in Tibet who went back into the monastery when the Chinese military was setting it on fire and destroying it to get the scrolls out so that they could be preserved. And she was gifted this scarf. She gifted it to another woman who then gifted it to me. I'm wearing this necklace because it comes from the women of South Africa. South Africa overturned apartheid. And it's also worth noting that in Cape Town, they've run out of water. I meant to put on this hairpiece. It's from the Rapa Nui people in Easter Island because they gained their independence from the nation of Chile recently. That was a done deal too. I'm wearing this turquoise in honor of my own people, the Daye, because recently we finally stopped the coal extraction and are going to renewable. Peabody Coal is finally shutting down. So I would ask my community to zoom out a little bit and see, both in time and in space, the moment that is upon us right now. Right now, we get to say, are we willing to risk what it will take to have life in this valley for us all? To live up to I'm going to call it contrived legal agreement that nobody even really knows what it means. I think there's somebody out there who knows exactly what it means. But I don't know that they have our life and our community at their heart. So what I envision for us here, I keep seeing it over and over again, it's unwavering, is that we and all the parties named here, eventually they will all be sitting here. And that all the parties will come together. And that we, because we love this home, we'll be able to come to a better agreement about our future, what needs to be done with the water and the land. I also want to say that we have an opportunity to set legal precedent here. Because in North Dakota, they are clamping down through their state government and saying that anybody who disrupts harmful earth, water, air activities, even by encouragement on social media, they're making freedom of speech and the right to assemble and peaceful protests deeply, deeply illegal. And even here in our hometown, we're facing that very thing, to where they're saying that they will try to perhaps garnish wages for our lifetime for speaking out. This is a place that we must stand, not only for ourselves, but for communities everywhere, because these legal precedents cannot move forward. So once again, it falls to the feisty home of Taos to set a few things straight. So I just thank everybody for showing up here. I thank our panelists. And I just love Taos so much, and I love all of you so much. And I trust us to be able to move forward in a good way. Thank you.
You gentlemen can come down here and join us. Thank you so much. I'd like to talk about what we have before us. Clearly, this community is intervening in what they were told was a done deal, but it's not a done deal. We have an opportunity because we live in a community where we have such deeply shared values. There is not a loud voice in this community for big subdivisions of 403 hotels. What there is in this community is a legacy of resistance. And coming up this summer, there's going to be a great need for many of us to be involved. The Tarleton subdivision, 400 plus homes, 3 hotels, a distillery, 200 acre feet that is completely reliant on the Abeyta Settlement being fully implemented. Those hearings are going to start this summer. That application is in its final preparations. Now, it's clearly premature for that subdivision to be approved. In fact, we're in the middle of the implementation, and all of it should not have begun before a full environmental impact study was conducted. That is the law. a cumulative and comprehensive study of the impacts, not just the direct impacts, but the social, cultural impacts. What does it mean in this community when we make available 1,500 more acre feet, completely reliant on deep aquifer extraction? These are decisions that we're going to make as a community, despite what the judges say, despite what the experts say, despite what the parties say. We are going to practice democracy here, and we're going to do it in a very loving and supportive way. We're going to do it from a prayerful place, because that is what our community has been sustained for thousands of years. There is an understanding here. Also, what is happening, we were told 2 weeks ago, we haven't got the details, but there's going to be a portion of the NEPA process, the National Environmental Policy Act. We're told that there's going to be a scoping process. We've seen that the pattern here is to divide this project into all of its discrete little pieces. An exploratory well here, a pipeline well, whatever. But there will be a scoping process, and what that means is that we are going to speak for the broadest possible scope. The scoping process means what are they going to look at in this study? And we're going to say, we're going to look at everything. And we're going to do it together as a community. Now, I don't believe that we're going to be saved by the National Environmental Policy Act, but it does give us a framework for us to do the work as a community, to figure out how it is that we can live within the water that is naturally offered to us by the rain, the snow, the springs, and we will not accept that growth is inevitable. We will manage that growth. We will keep ourselves in balance here. And it's going to require many of us to show up. And it's also going to require that we get really inventive with our institutions of democracy, primarily the acequia system. What it means to regenerate the land where we live with small holdings is that we have to develop the cooperative access to the means of production so that we can grow food here. We can do it even though we are not full-time farmers, that few of us can afford the appropriate equipment, the access to markets, the added value, all these things. These things are what people of the land have done cooperatively because peasants did not have the means to do it themselves. And that's what we are. We're people of the land, and we have the heart and the desire to make it possible. To make it possible that our land can absorb the water and keep our aquifers healthy and vibrant, that this place can support our lives and our children's lives and all their children to come. So there's a lot to be done. There's going to be lots of avenues, and the Guardians of Taos Water are among the groups that are going to be making these opportunities clear to all of us. And we're going to need all of your help. Thank you.
Thanks for coming out, everybody. My name's Sage. We have this donation jar, and honestly, we're all full-time workers and family members, and we really need community support. I don't go around asking for money often, but for this cause, I do. And if you have anything to offer, I'm going to be passing around this donation jar. A lot of work goes into this planning. Some of us are working two full-time jobs, working on this water issue and paying our bills. This is not an easy situation to be in. What I would like to share real quick is, really, we're not here for ourselves. The water is going to be here in our lifetime, but what about after our lifetime? At what point do we start thinking about the next 7 generations and planning that into everything that we do, every action that we take? And our beautiful relatives at Taos Pueblo understand that sort of thinking. Our relatives in Navajo Nation understand that thinking. But the colonial mindset only understands profit now and greed now at any cost. And the absence of the parties tonight silences complicity at this point. If we remain silent about the destruction of our community, about the erosion of values, it's up to us to change things. We can't depend on elected officials to do this. This is a community movement, and we are calling on the community. We have been knocking on doors, asking, will you please give us information? Nothing. Silence, like tonight. We knew, more than likely, most of those chairs would be empty. As Pat mentioned, we are being sued for $2 million plus. We have about $1,000 in the bank account. After this forum, you better believe we're gonna go back to direct action, because it's enough talking. We are going to be demanding that El Prado and Cooper Drilling remove this lawsuit immediately. We have been blacked out of the media. Cultural Energy Radio 90.1 refuses to air our PSAs. This information is being suppressed, and we're sick of it. We are not here violently, but we're frustrated because the children are crying out to the elders to listen. Look what's happening. It's a beautiful year. It's a beautiful spring, but last year, the river was flowing at 7 CFS. It was puddles. We cannot expect the rain every year, so we have to plan for a better vision, ultimately. So, I say this tonight because we really come from the heart, you know. We're here because we care about this community. We love this community. We work in the fields. We work with the water. We work with the people. All of this is sacred to us, all of these elements. The water is just one, but community is just as sacred as the water, because without community, we don't have anything. We disappear. So I want to keep this short because there's been enough talking, but we will be out in this community again because we have no choice but to act at this point. And we're not trying to go through all the traditional channels of injustice. We know there are other channels, and Spirit and the water provides these channels. And so I just want to honor everybody for coming out tonight and honor David Fernandez. What an amazing man, and they were able to defeat a big federal project to preserve the cultures and the communities that love this place. So thank you so much, and there's a lot of positivity, you know, there's frustration, yes, but community, it's beautiful to get together and to be active and to do good things together. So thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Sage. Thank you to Pat McCabe, Bob Johnston. Thank you to David Fernandez, Cliff Bain. So right now we're going to move into, thank you all for staying, we're going to move into our Q&A. This is open to everybody. Anybody who has a question, I'll be running around with microphones, question, answer, question, answer. Raise your hand if you have a question, and I'll come right to you.
My question is, how do we get votes? And I want to hear the panel's answers, but very quickly, I wanted to let the community know. Meow Wolf called me today to give me advice on how to create a house of acequia return, which will invite people from Albuquerque and Denver to come learn what it's like to, the gritty reality and the magical reality of living in an acequia community. So those of you who remember the Milagro bean field, and remember the standoff, and remember the party, we want to get that story going again in support of acequias here and in Colorado, and just to have the politicians have a reason to listen, because there's a lot of voters saying, you need to let the acequias be acequias. You can't change the rules on them and make them be something else.
Okay, so the question was...
The question is,
how do we get votes?
To the panelists, how do we get votes? How do we get the politicians to support the acequias and not the developers?
Thank you very much.
You're, I think, the first panelist that I see. Is there somebody? We can also open it up to the community that's here. If there are questions, chances are somebody has an answer. So, is there anybody who feels comfortable answering that question?
The mayor will. Unless the mayor wants to. To get votes from the people, I think we'll go back to what was discussed a little earlier by Chris himself, that a democracy has to be be comprised of informed individuals who know about the issues and know about the choices that they have, and if there's no choices that they like, feel empowered to make new solutions for themselves if they're not being offered. And a little bit beyond that, how do we get the politicians to kind of vote for us and speak for us, I believe was the second part of that. And at this point, I think we have to choose better politicians.
All right, another question. Do you have any questions here?
I did, but the panel's gone, so.
We still have some panelists here.
Ask a question, please. Ask.
I'd like to hear your question.
Yeah. We've been waiting all night to hear what you even if you just want to comment.
Basically, I don't have a question and one comment. That I live at one of the head gates in Colorado, and I live right above one of the main wells, and I've been trying to recharge the aquifer by irrigating my field and my land, and I do have a tractor that we're trying to improve my land. And I've been having trouble with the water, because I'm a landowner and I have to ask permission to get water to improve my land, and my land is located right above the aquifer in the well, in Mercado. And you guys know that well provides a lot of water for the town this past year because we were in drought. And as my work goes with a tractor, I've been trying to help people and trying to develop their lands so they can prosper or have some kind of pride in their land and develop it so it's green and start just sitting there with, weeds in it. And I'm having a lot of trouble because people don't want to develop their land because they're worried about the water. Because they have to ask certain people for permission for that water. And then those certain people are denying a lot of people their right to the water. So they don't want to develop their land. And all that land up there, when I was a kid, had alfalfa that tall. All the land, all the fields. And today, when I walk up there, it's so sad that I walk up there in the bushes, in the weeds. And I look around and I'm like, where are my leaders? Because I'm sitting there, we're sitting on the aquifer. It all comes from the top. And for us being there at the forefront of this water, I'm having a hard time trying to grow. And there's a lot of stuff coming up, say for instance hemp. That's a vibrant, upcoming plant that could be utilized. But we can't. We have no water to develop our fields and our land. And I didn't have this tractor for long, but I'm seeing right now today, it's hard. It's hard to irrigate. And so for that reason there, people do not want to develop their land, because it's a lot of money to have a field plowed, this, raked, seeded, and all that. You put in $1,000. And then if you can't water it, there it goes. I don't know how many fields we lost last year. I put a lot of seed in the ground, it went to waste. And I know that there was no water. It was tough. But this year, we got a lot of water. I see no help. Our ditches are closed today. Why? I don't know. There's plenty of water there. People put seed in the ground and they can't water it. So they're going to lose a lot. And that's one of the things I'm seeing today is that people that want to put water back into the land and make the land green again are having trouble finding the water to do it. And that water provides the aquifer for the town of Taos. I was a war chief 4 years ago, 2005, and there was an issue. There's not enough water in the aquifer to support the growth of Taos. Yeah. And thank God we own Track A, Track B, Taos Provo. All that land, because that can't be developed to big box stores and all that stuff, and big communities and stuff. Thank God we own it. Taos can only get so big. And right now, the aquifer is in trouble. And all of us. So, if we can get back to basics, like our grandfathers did. When I was a kid, our pump was this tall, all the fields. Why can't we do that today? And that's one of my biggest issues is that there's all this fighting with the water. There's all this, no, you can't have it, no. That's all I'm seeing. Why can't we say yes? The council member right here, I don't know his name. He said, plant your seeds. Plant them. Are you going to give me water? You going to give me water? Those plants can grow? I'm not seeing that today. They plant seeds. I don't know how many fields I planted last year. They burnt because we didn't have no water. And I understand that we're going to do it now. But today, maybe we can change that.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, have you noticed a shift since the implementation of the Abeyta with being able to access the water? When did this change come where, I know there was drought last year, but I have heard of headgates being blocked on the Pueblo and Parciantes not being able to access the water even though there is plenty of water. Do you mind explaining this a little bit more from your perspective so we can understand them?
I wish I could, but I'm only a problem. I'm not involved with the government up there. So I see it from that side of the fence. So I don't know, really, they don't really tell me what's going on. We just have
You don't remember like maybe a moment in time when you're like, yeah, that's when things started to seem different when it came to water?
Yeah, it did when I lost about 90% of my trees.
When was that?
3 years ago.
3 years ago.
Yeah, I lost all that, like, I planted my fields and all that. It just seemed like a waste of money. It's like, I got discouraged. It was like, why am I planting? What am I planting? Because, I don't know, I'm just taking up a lot of your time. But yeah, I did. Thank you.
All right, questions, comments?
Comment? I'm glad the room is almost empty. I wasn't going to do this because I just moved to the Mesa. You guys know what the Mesa is? Raise your hand.
Which Mesa?
If you don't, raise your hand. Good.
Which Mesa?
We're on the same page. I moved to Taos Mesa, but I was born in the South Valley of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And in 1964, 65, 66, 67, 68, I used to come to Taos because I go fishing with my dad up in Lagunitas and Eagle's Nest. And as an 8-year-old child, I remember the first thing I thought about Taos is there's a lot of Texans there. I saw all the license plates. And as an 8-year-old child, I said, I don't like this. They're buying up our land. That was 1960-something, 64, 65. I was awakened as an 8-year-old. Now I'm going to turn 62 this month. I came here to retire because I'm an amazing artist. I never thought I could afford to live here. And then I found the Mesa. And we're talking about water. I'm not as rehearsed as Azalea is because I'm new, the concept. But I'm thinking, there are 70, 80-year-old women and men like myself, and I met a woman who walked 2.5 miles with a blue 5-gallon jug to get water. And I'm thinking, if we can't take care of those people, why are we going to give our water to people that didn't invest in it? You know? So unless you're willing to give vehicles and buy water cards for all the people on the Mesa that are retired there on $700 a month, then I think that we should really go back to the drawing board. Water is our life, and thank you.
Anybody else? Questions, comments?
I don't have any questions, but I would like to thank the panel for your support and also for the community. Together we're in unity. Indigenous one, together we can help save our water for the community, for the future. I remember growing up seeing my uncles and grandpas seeing this, using the acequias. I have one through my property. I've had fruit trees that were there that were planted in the ground way before I was even thought of, or my mother or my father. So I'm going to keep this going. And sometimes it's hard because the pueblo does lock our water. Sometimes we can't get it, so we're afraid to plant our fields. But I'm going to try my best and fight for the water to keep it going and not to put in pipes in the ground. But thank you, everybody. The great one above, that's the only way that we can keep our moisture going, not by pumping the water up, but by prayer as well. Blessings.
I think we're going to do, I think that's it. I think we're going to do a closing prayer, everybody. This one works better. Yes, we're going to do a closing prayer.